Okay, good. So I will be starting the presentation with demoing this prototype. And then I will go through my background a bit to explain how I got into this kind of art. And then I'm also going to go into why art like this is important from my perspective. And then I also going to mention a couple of examples how I have worked with the challenges. And then we can have a Q&A, and you can come here and you can take stuff apart and like see how things look. And I've done like 4 COVID tests and quarantine and everything, so it's okay for me if you approach me and if you want to like touch the implants that I have. So this prototype is played with implants in my hands and my upper body. Today I'm also having an external here, so you can be able to see how it looks. And basically what it does is should trigger like this. And there was a blue light also when it's active. So near field that I explained at the bottom, it means that this chip is passive until a reader with a magnetic field powers it. That means I have control of who reads my data basically. So I have to be like this close to the sensor. Me and Max Björverud and Håkan Lidbo, 2 Swedish artists, we created this to kind of show how we can communicate through technology. So I'm just showing this while I'll talk. And there are different models of those implants. And my newer ones are the ones with the light. So I have, if you see the blue light when it's triggered, the same as here. And it's a bit harder to read on the chest because there's more fat. So the easiest chip to read is the one where it's mostly skin and bones. So that's how this instrument works. I'm gonna plug it out now. Wait, should I wait? Okay. And in the end we can come back to this if you want, and you can see how it's built. It's a Raspberry Pi, Arduinos with NFC sensors or cards and antennas. And everything I will be talking about today, you can find everything through my website, Isdrake.com, and you're welcome to contact me with any questions you have. I'll get back to this contact slide later on. So I'm going to start here. My academic journey started in archaeology. And in archaeology, I got to see this diversity that we have around the planet, this cultural diversity, mostly in terms of storytelling and how people shared their experiences of life through this kind of sharing of stories. And this is like spirits from all over the world, or gods, or people call them Aesir, people call this different stuff. But mostly it's like creatures and spirits that embody something that people thought represented something, or their religion, or yeah, it's different for different cultures. And what's interesting, so I'm from the north, so our mythology, this world, has survived through so many years. So we basically see the same stories from the Iron Age through the Lord of the Rings, the Marvel films, World of Warcraft, God of War, those different games and films. So it's interesting that even though the stories was kind of oppressed for some hundreds of years by missionaries, it still survived. And it's similar in other cultures, like those stories and elements survive through a lot of discrimination and oppression. So there is a power in the stories we tell and the art that we use to express this. So those are some examples of games. I'm a game designer, so my tech knowledge comes from there and archaeology. So I'm not really a musician, I wouldn't call myself a musician, but I do audiovisual art as well. So those are different games from all over the world. And the dice, for example, are very similar. From Persia to Sweden, it's the same kind of model, which is very interesting. So we have tabletop games, physical games like labyrinths, and we also have representations of them on images, which is why archaeologists have been able to put some clues together and kind of guess what kind of game this is. And there are different kinds of games. It's for entertainment, for education, for power play. So it's I think for me it kind of connects a lot of the things I'm interested in, like audio, visual arts, interactivity, and so on. And we're like with games also is that you can really use your imagination, and you can have a game world where you have, like, this is one of my favorite games. You have robot dinosaurs. I like robots, I like dinosaurs, and this kind of world combines it. And it's also a non-male lead character, which is has been more unusual until recently. And she's also having a lot of this kind of cyborg stuff. So games also, in terms of hardware and tools, it has also supported or made tech dev faster, I would say. But also technology is not just like this electronics, it's everything around us, because people often see technology as something new, something some might fear, but actually everything, all the tools I use is technology. So I knit a lot, for example. I was interested in access in archaeology. And then here's also examples of the implants. So it's the instrument I play, it's a similar technology to this. So it's like 1 centimeter big, and this is a magnet that was inserted in one of my fingers with a needle like this. And this is a new thing. It's a really, really small implant that you can put into your body to track temperature. It's a medical implant. So that's interesting, it's new. To kind of see, you can track the temperature and see if somebody's getting ill. As like in the archaeological journey, I kind of continued from Stone Age, Iron Age, and into computers, and saw this development that gave us so many tools to express ourselves with. What I also like in working in games and as well as film is this kind of freedom of choice, that I think people should be able to choose how they want to experience a story. So this is examples of film that is more like one-way communication, more linear, or VR, where you can be inside a story world. And then there is the extreme on the bottom, where you can be totally immersed. In this case, it's Battlefield, like a war game. So the player is walking on a floor that moves the player to the middle all the time. So this player is walking around in VR, and there's also plastic guns he's being shot if he isn't playing well enough. So this is like very immersive, and I think that we should be able to choose how much we want to interact. So what I also find interesting working in those areas is design fiction. And those are examples of how films have inspired engineers and designers to actually create what was called a cell phone in the early days, or those tablets that we have now. They were both inspired from Star Trek. And then I think it's Minority Report with this AR screen and the gloves. So a lot of this kind of design fiction shapes the future. This is my film work. I use this as an example that the work is very collaborative, but I also sometimes like this kind of preparation where you work more alone. But all of those big story worlds also you need collaborative skills. So collaborative skills is one of the core skills of the future as well. This is an example, this tattoo that I have here. I have a chip that I could use for the instrument, as you saw. But this was also the first movie linked from a body, to my knowledge at least. So this links to this ultrasonic video of my heart. I don't know if you can hear. Maybe the audio is too low. yeah, we can hear a little bit of the heartbeat. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. So the audio here is a mix of nerve sounds that I recorded through microneurography, which is a medical device that was created to help stroke patients. Because sometimes stroke patients lose connection between a leg and the communication between a leg and the brain, for example. And what I liked with this kind of sound is that it's also very similar to how space sounds. So there's so many connections that I found interesting. And then the heartbeat is a male voice. So this is artist Reaps One. There's a beatboxer. So he's doing the beat with his voice, and I also wanted a male voice to kind of play with his gender. So if I implant a male voice in my body, like who does it belong to and so on. So this was actually my first project with the implants. I also added a countdown. So when people, sometimes when I perform, persons can come and they can scan my heart with this tablet. So in a way that is also to show how technology can bring us closer together. I'm neurodiverse, autistic, so I don't express emotion so like greatly. So it's also a very simple way to just say that I'm giving away a heartbeat every time someone scans it. So this is an estimated number of the heartbeats a mammal of my size has to live, my size and age, basically. And this is another example of a game where I also worked with a team at CERN, and we used biofeedback. So we interviewed researchers at CERN, and we also filmed the labs and created a game environment based on materials we filmed with a Kinect. It's actually similar to the art piece on the wall there, so it's a Kinect on top. And you can create this kind of mesh structure. So you can see footage with the camera, normal camera, and then the Kinect camera. And the same with the researchers. And you can play this game with a normal game controller, but you can also play it with this brain sensor, which is one of the simpler and cheaper versions, basically the same price as a game console or a game controller. So we wanted something accessible. And what it does is that this clip is on the ear, so it measures the pulse, and this is on the frontal cortex, like front of the brain, and it reads brain waves. So what that means is when you play this game, and you move through this kind of labyrinth or world, you meet researchers and they talk about the research. And this basically mostly gives two data, if you're focused or not focused. So if you're not focused, the game system will push you to another part of the world where you might meet a researcher that talks with like easier language, maybe talks about that they're a violinist, so they play music to kind of get into their research again. Because this is about dark matter, so it's a very complex research area, which is also why my team chose to work with it, because it leaves so much room for imagination and storytelling. But if you focus, you might go into a much more complicated explanation of the research. So this kind of game could also, if it would be used in the educational system, would actually put the power of knowledge and how you learn in the student's body. So you would learn in your own pace, which I find important because this educational system is not adapted to people like me, for example, with neurodiversity. So we need to kind of restructure this and see different levels of engagement again. This is just to show another example of games that is called a LARP, live action role play. As you can imagine, I don't really act, or I prefer to be behind the camera, but as a game designer, I really wanted to understand this kind of game as well. So a friend asked me if I could play myself as an artist in this story about an artist collective. And we were in Denmark, but then I also traveled around Europe for another project. So we actually had a social media profile where we posted pictures from our fake characters, which was complicated for me because I was kind of a real character, but also kind of because you kind of become a bit fake character as well. But it was actually my real art. So the masks are from my art project. They borrowed it, and here I did some stunt training when I was younger. So this is a Danish police raiding the artist collective, and they were actual police, so they weren't really trained stunt people, which I could feel when they kind of tackled me down. So that was an interesting experience. And then the police car is because I had my office in a film studio. We also had a lab. So we had those cars because they were shooting all those cop movies in Sweden. So this is a fake car, and my mask sticker is a magnet, so I'm actually not leaving any traces on the car. But when I post this on my Facebook profile as an artist for the TV series that came like half year later after the LARP, so we were in character on social media for 6 months before the TV show was released. So that's sometimes called a transmedia universe. So it can be perceived very differently if you see this picture on Facebook, which also made me think a lot as an artist, like where is my responsibility when I start acting with everyday life. This is another example of art that I do, circus arts. So I danced when I was younger in New York, and I also started adding fire to the shows, which meant that I also had to learn a lot of new things like about chemistry, different materials, Kevlar, which again is technology and things we can use to extend our bodies, not to replace them. Unless we lose a part, then we can replace them. Like the singer Victoria Modesta that we worked with in Berlin. She has like one of her bones is artificial, so it's full with she has different models with lamps and sensors, which was really fun to work with on stage. And on this picture, the reason I have the back of the head is because it's the same technology that we took apart and hid in her hair. So the same brain waves were red, but to control the stage light. And on the arms were researchers from MIT who made LED lights and then fake skin over them, so it looked like her skin was shiny. And the other singers along that I also work with a lot with dancers where we use different materials in the costume to also extend the performance. And this is from the Victoria Modesta show, and the lights in the back are the ones that were controlled with her mind. So they switched between blue and red depending on her brain waves. There's another example where I used this instrument and collaborated with artists at Slush in Finland. And this is another singer, Rika, that is visually impaired. And it was very interesting to work with her because she told me that when she's on stage, she felt lonely because she couldn't really connect with the audience or her band members. And we also had this communication on stage, like how do we give each other cues when we can't really speak on stage? Because usually I would do a dance movement with my hand, and band members would react to it. So we had this several challenges that we had to solve, which was very interesting. And she's also carrying this kind of brain wave that controls the TV screen in the back. And we also took 4 or 5 members from the audience and connected them to pulse sensors. So the pulse sensors created heartbeats in the audio that Rika then could hear. So that was one way of kind of giving some kind of feedback from the audience to her. So this was a very interesting challenge. I also did some fashion design and started adding layers to that as well, mixing different materials and masks with humidity sensors. And this was also interesting in terms of the LARPing that I mentioned, because here we started I worked with dancers, parkour artists, skateboarders in New York and filmed documentary, like small clips. But we were in those spaces like Times Square, in the metro, and it was so interesting how people reacted, because when I was in the metro with those two dancers, people didn't really react. But at one point I was with 2 male actors, and their masks were darker, like black and green. And then some people got scared and they got off the train. And then I felt really stupid, scared those people. So it's interesting how color and this kind of interaction really affects your surrounding. So there's a lot of things as an artist to think about, the responsibilities, but also actually hacking the cityscape a bit. This is a gallery. I've had a gallery for electronic art in Sweden, and they also work with other galleries. So this gallery in Stockholm that I was curator of. And then I got into esports as well, mostly supporting like the esports scene in Sweden, and thinking of ways to make this more, like to change the story in media. Because in media a lot of people have been talking about this very negatively, like this digital culture, this gaming culture, as something bad, or it's like a nerd culture. But those numbers are like from 2015 and so on, that show that this culture is actually bigger than many of the other sports. So esports is basically a sport where you play digital games. So it's interesting because it's all, I mean, the game industry is bigger than the music and film industry together. So decision makers and politicians can't really ignore it or say that it's just a nerd culture anymore. For example, now people talk a lot about the metaverse. I prefer to talk about metaverses, which is basically those digital worlds where a lot of our lives will be lived partly now in the future. And Fortnite is one of the closest solutions to this kind of digital world. And here is also, which is also used for other things. So here is a concert, for example, with a musician. So those big game worlds can actually be used for other kinds of events, which is really interesting now in terms of COVID, because this development is moving much faster now, thanks to this situation where we have to start living our lives more on several platforms. And it also gives a lot of, for me, it's been, I wouldn't survive without like the internet and being able to do Skype meetings like 13 years ago. Because most of my collaborators were in the US or Canada. In Sweden, nobody knew what I was doing like 20 years ago. So it was really like essential for me when Skype came. And I also like to mention this number, 350 million registered accounts in this one game. And that is the number like we can't really ignore. So it's really interesting to understand how many people live in those worlds. So I like this picture because it's really like the common structure in society, at least that I experience in Sweden. I mean, Iceland is the most gender equal country on this planet, but we can't really take that for granted. So now I'm going into this the challenges I've had in my work, mixing, because like in the game industry, when I worked there, people often think, yeah, but you're like too artsy. While in the art world, it's like, but you're too techy. And then you're always like this in between, which gives problems with the funding applications, for example. Because when I was younger, there wasn't even a digital application system. You had a paper form with boxes, and you had to tick like drama, painting, sculpture, this kind of boxes. So there was either I could click like everyone or cross everyone, or just had to do a new box. So what I experienced with this, the cyborg implants, for example, is the way some communities react. I don't know if you've heard about 8chan and those kind of Gamergate and this, what's going on in some communities. And a very common reaction to those NFC implants is that it's the mark of the beast, which is like a Christian expression. That was used in the 1500s during the witch hunts when people burned sorcerers and witches. So this picture is kind of interesting to see that people usually choose the simple path instead of actually asking what is the truth here. And also this Donna Haraway was one of the first people to write about cyborgs, and she wrote the Cyborg manifesto. There are a lot of researchers referenced sometimes. So I like this, that she's really saying that technology is not neutral, because it's not. And also this fear, we have to work, we have to really, fear is like made up. And in terms of fear, so this lady reference is just a way to show that the world is not more violent now than it was before. And there was an article several years ago, I don't remember how many years ago, but that said that there was a connection between violence and gaming, and this was fake news. So it was just an article that there wasn't proper research article or something, and people still today reference this just to back up their fear of digital culture. But now we're actually getting more and more actual research that proves that that's wrong. So the gladiator games is just or sport is a way to show that no, it's not more violent today. And also sex and violence is part of human life, so we have to be able to talk about it. And in terms of films, for example, has been sex and violence for so much longer, but still it's always like the blame is always on games, which I'm getting a bit tired of as a game designer. I also like to mention this Socrates, the example with this philosopher, is that when people start writing books, he got really upset and said, but people are going to get stupid, because then they can't like remember all the knowledge. If you write books, that's dangerous. So there people were like fearing books. And today it's the same thing with other media, right? So this kind of fear is something that's has been there through the entire human history. And it was very, very, with the colonialism, for example, one of the first things the missionaries did, or the rulers and kings that started taking over parts of the world, was to actually forbid body modification. Because what you do then is that you take away a person's identity. And when people are insecure about their identity, their tribal community, where they belong, people feel lost, and then it's easier, which is why you often find Bibles in prisons and hotels. Before there was always like a Bible in the hotel room, because there was some, probably people are alone at the hotel or something. So it's interesting to see this kind of marketing. So I basically call the Christian mission the most successful and most violent marketing campaign in human history, because it's still like being reinforced in every, if you look at a Marvel film, for example, you hear references every 10th minute or something. And there's even a scene, I mean, the later movies are actually better, but it's a bit weird that Black Panther and was it Captain Marvel, like the female and non-white superheroes, they came when I was like 38 or 40 or something. When I was young, there was nothing like even to compare with. So it is getting better, but still, like Captain America, when I saw that movie, I got really pissed off, because there was this scene where Captain America, I don't know if you know, there's a very American dude with this kind of muscles, you know, and there's also Thor and Loki, which from my cultural background, and Captain America looks at Thor and Loki and he says like, yeah, there's only one God, and he's not wearing what you're wearing, and he's like looking down on them. And that was just like, this is a show that millions of kids look at, and this is the kind of messages that just pumps through in mainstream media all the time. But now actually this is kind of this body modification and our patterns that we use are coming back. So I really like this picture, because it's women really taking back their tribal identity through their tattoos. And also the punk movement for me, punk and death metal and black metal was very important for me as a counterculture when I grew up. And I kind of connect, so even if today I have the cyborg implants, for me it's the same world as this. This is examples from Sweden and Poland. So not so long ago, you have to fact check the period, because I don't remember, but I think it was in the 60s that Swedish women went to Poland to do abortions. and now it's the other way around. So that's not so long ago. And this photo is from a protest in Poland a couple of years ago, and I love this photo. It's really nice, and this the quote there. And there was another protest with this red lightning that was the symbol, which the lightning is an older symbol for the thunder deities, and Zeus and Thor and Indra and those kind of kamikaze, those kind of creatures, spirits. And the Polish government tried to like say, no, it's the Nazis. So they tried to like, how do you say, minimize the women that were protesting, which was really interesting to see how they would use the fake stories, just like the Nazis used some of the Nordic symbols or Indo symbols to kind of rewrite the story, which in Sweden has caused a tremendous identity crisis, because people don't really dare to talk about our Nordic culture because the Nazis misuse it so much. So people are afraid that it would be connected with racism and so on. So it's interesting how Nazis and communists kind of take symbols and turn them into something else. The drum in the bottom is from Sami drum. So not so long ago, I think it was the 1700s in Sweden, was the last time a person was killed because they were communicating with their gods. So people who had this kind of ritual drum were taken into court by the priests in Sweden. And also male sorcerers were burned, or hanged, or they cut their heads off. So it was not only women. And also this picture is from Mora in Sweden, where also 150 children were tortured because they were told to have been with the women to Blåkulla, which is like a blue hill, where the priest said that the women, they flew to have sex with Satan. And because they took the kids with them, they also had to like torture the kids. So this language that I told you about, like the mark of the beast, it comes from this kind of period. And for me, it was really scary to see this kind of language come up when Cyborg start talking about our way of communicating. Because for me, this is a voice. Like I would never dare to sing, or I don't sing or scream and so on. But I added a scream to a chip at one point as a way to show like pain, because I did a biopsy on my leg. Like a doctor needs to take samples from a tumor, and he was drilling in my leg for more than 2 hours, which was the worst pain I've ever felt. And I kind of asked the doctor, can you just give me, like, put me to sleep or something, so I don't have to like experience this? And his response was like, yeah, but you're not screaming. And this is like a doctor, I really have issues with doctors. I had another issue with my magnet when I was doing MRI. So it's kind of this attitude from people that you would guess should be more open-minded and know about different ways of communication, that not all people express pain in a certain way. So it's so much bias and discrimination that I wasn't really aware that it was still that bad. And then I started looking into this more, and it's really affecting, like this kind of language from the 1500s has affected the history for women, especially in this case, that even the human rights, so as of today, the human rights, even the Nordic translations, they are actually written in he form. So it's always like his rights, or the production of which he is the author. And I mean, I emailed the UN several times without an answer, and just asked, like, can you just update your website? It takes 5 minutes to just swap his to there, because they and there, it's a accepted term in the American language now, to have this kind of pronoun. So it's this kind of monoculture that the newer religions were pushing for. It really makes people easier to manipulate and easier to control. So we need this diversity. I mean, a lot of people need to have some kind of belief system, but it can never come at the cost of someone else. So we really need to diversify and have a bigger like freedom of choice, and also let people who have been colonized to actually get their identities back, which is happening slowly, partly thanks to digital culture actually, and in some cases VR. And what happened, like this is also an example similar to the human rights, is that in the tech industry, women working with computers and starting at IT schools, they were dropping after another kind of marketing campaign, which was for computer games and computer, like the hardware. Because often in the commercials, there's always a man holding the game controller, while the female is often like holding like food or on a plate, or standing like in a sexy pose above a Commodore, for example. And this kind of commercial, it really has an effect, as you can see on the drop in how many people went to tech school. This is an example of digital artists. They were really early in kind of answering this male-dominated area. And I just found it interesting, this line where it says that the clitoris is a direct line to the matrix, because that is also what is stated in this The Witch Hammer, this book that was like an instruction on how to find women and torture them and prove that they were witches. One of the things was that the priest thought that the clitoris was a third nipple that was connected to the devil. This is like I thought that was the reference. So in those torture books, there's very specific ways how the priest describe how you shave the female body to look for this mark of the beast, penetrate them with like burning iron. That was apparently very good to get them to confess that they were witches. So this is like real things, and people are referencing this today, which I find super scary. So we should never take for granted that we have these freedoms that we have here in Iceland, for example. I mean, even in Sweden, I have been threatened through the Swedish church. So it's there are men in power, or women as well, in power positions that really have a big effect on what's happening in cities. Yeah, so this is another kind. I would just want to show this in terms of implants and body modification. That it's not really new. People with diabetes have this like very good technology where they can have their medication. The spiral here is, for me, it's I identify that as a medical implant that has improved the lives of many. So technology is really nothing new, and we don't have to fear it as long as it's developed in a diverse way. And this Gore-Tex jacket and this Icelandic sweater that I did is just an example to show that both materials are functional against rain, but most people have said that one is more natural than the other. So this kind of terminology, like saying something is natural, isn't really, it's problematic. In terms of counter tactics, I also, you know, the picture with the mask that I showed you, I worked a lot with psychogeography, which is also questioning the way cities are designed and how we move in cities, like the flow of movement. So I started using those shoes. This is my digital avatar, which is a 3D scan of myself. It's a picture is a bit crappy, but the shoes are like jumping shoes. So in 2013 up to 2016, I think, I used those as shoes every day and was kind of jump running to my lab and back. And I actually changed the way my body runs. So when I took them off and tried to run, I really couldn't run, because it was like hitting the ground so hard, and I realized how hard the ground is that we work on, because I got used to this kind of smooth movement. So that was also a way for me to play with embodiment and also how I move within a city. And at some point I was sitting in a conference with a person from Volvo, I think, or someone who was working with automated cars. And that was also another interesting issue, because I would have been perceived as a kangaroo or something, or I could be hit easily because I had a different way to move. So that's also interesting how AI is very biased. And in terms of AI, the next thing I want to do with this instrument is to actually create a dark voice for myself. So I want to swap one of the audio files to a voice that is machine generated. And then I found an interesting example called the data bots that have trained a neural network on black metal. So it plays this kind of music that is generated. But it also gives, I did an example with growl voice. I'm not going to play it now because I think I'm running out of time. But I used the material from the Databots, where they used a band called Meshuggah, a Swedish band, that they released an album for free based on their album without their consent, I think. It said something like this on the website. So what happens if I then use that? And this is kind of interesting. So I put together a voice where I mixed a lot of growls that I recorded, but those were voices from other people. Which is also a reason why I only use it for prototyping. But when I had like a smaller data set of sounds, it didn't sound so good. So when you work with AI systems, you really need a big set of data to make good products. I also wrote here that when I'm here in Iceland next week, I want to shoot a music video for this. So if there is anyone that wants to collaborate on this, I will do that next week. So it will be fun, because I like to collaborate with local artists when I'm traveling. So just let me know if anybody would be up for that, to just play with this and see what happens. Oh, I played the song anyway. So that was just an example. So with the data sets, what happens is they're very biased. So if you Google hands, for example, you will find a lot of mostly light-skinned, mostly male hands. And then when you train an AI or an AI system agent on this kind of data set, this system will think that this is how a hand looks. And what happens with that is, for example, in software, face recognition software, this researcher with darker skin, the system can't really read her face unless she puts on a white mask. So that is the result of all this, from the language that I talk about, using biased language, Christian language, where women, so this language in 3.5 million books, for example, AI systems are really good to go through data quickly. So that's a very useful way to use them. So in 3.5 million books, this system found that women were described depending on their appearance, and men more about their behavioral skills. So this shapes, can you imagine how that shapes in the future? And this is an example of deep fake, how you can also fake somebody's face. So we need to really talk about source acceptance and digital literacy and tech literacy with all ages, and in schools and at companies. So I sometimes compare with this ergonomic chair. Like, why do we not have this kind of thinking when we design everything? Like game controllers, hardware, software, that we really need to think in this kind of human-centric design in everything we do, also organizations. Because what we do now will affect generations to come. This is an example from a festival in Linz, art festival, where there was a sex robot installations where people approached this robot, broke her fingers, broke the breasts. And for me, this was really like, I have a really hard time to understand how somebody physically is able to do that, to approach this piece and just like break it. Why would somebody do that? So we need to also talk about cyborg racism or robot racism or discrimination, robot discrimination. That is actually not just like a joke, because it does affect behavior of companion robots, for example. So and here is a comparison with Japan, because what I felt when I lived in Tokyo was that there was a totally different attitude. There was great fear for this kind of thing, like when it was inside the human body, that was not really okay, and tattoos were not really okay. But companion robots that were separate from your own body or looked like your own body, that was okay. They were really treated as there was a spirit, like animism, if you're familiar with this kind of way of thinking, that everything has a spirit. and you should like treat it accordingly, which is something that a belief system that I kind of feel fits me at least. So the solutions for this for me has been to travel around and talk about it like I do now. Even though I really feared talking in public before, I learned to do it the last years. Mainly thanks to lecturing at universities, because that was easier than at big conferences for me. So I learned how to talk about this stuff. Also at the EU Commission, for example, where I demoed this instrument for the very first time and talked about the importance of having the A in STEAM. So there was a meeting about the innovation budget for the EU. And everyone talked about STEM, like science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but nobody talked about art. So we really pushed this, that there has to be an A there. So they actually changed their official document and added the A to their innovation budget, which was super important. So it can give effects in the long run if we dare to do this. To actually talk about it. And this is from a cosplay conference where I was in the jury, which was also very inspiring, because so many young people had this very creative skill set of creating game character costumes. So I'm the blue creature, as you probably guessed. And this picture is kind of fun because you see the tables, this here. So that's the EU Commission in Strasbourg, and the tables are designed so everyone with an Apple computer, we were sitting there for hours and hours like talking about decision making, and we couldn't really charge our computers. So it's just a very stupid and fun example of how this kind of important room is designed. Just the table design is so crappy that there was an issue for everyone with a computer like this if you didn't have another cable. So it's this kind of stupidity that we meet in design like everywhere and in important settings. Another example is this street design where one model that is for visually impaired could be really dangerous for someone in a wheelchair. So we really need to have a dialogue when we design cities so that people really are involved in the design and decision making. And the lab I created a couple of years ago to kind of bring those issues up to a decision-maker level was called, I call it the Collaboratory. It was in Gothenburg, Sweden, and then in Stockholm for a while. For a couple of years ago, I had a dialogue here with people to maybe set up in Iceland, but I didn't find funding, so it kind of, that was the problem everywhere, I didn't find funding. Which is also why I closed it down in Sweden, but the community is still living on in different forms, and we have events sometimes. So this was kind of the mind map with all the features we felt were needed in this kind of innovative space. I know there's a science park here or a makerspace in the libraries, this kind of setting. And it was very important to give room for all those different dialogues. So makerspace, game making, sharing machines, hacking stuff, startup support, talking about open innovation and social innovation, and really kind of combining people from different backgrounds. In my company, I use something called the 5 Ps to kind of create a healthy work environment. And the important pillars of this is purpose. The purpose, there has to be a purpose for most people. To feel passionate about something. It also has to, no work is fun all the time. There has to be pleasure in what we do. And the people are always the key. Like when I opened my lab, it was basically empty. We didn't have any tools and stuff. It was just people, and then we started to share things. So the sharing economy, playfulness, really imaginance is our greatest intelligence. I call it imaginance. Was something we tried to push there. And then cryptocurrencies, Creative Commons, all those kind of trends that came, and Wikinomics. We really talked about those new systems and thought about how we can use them to support artists. Like an NFT today is something a lot of people are talking about. So that is ways. Actually, the slush performance I mentioned in Helsinki, we actually manually recorded all the artist credits on a blockchain while we did this performance, so that everyone would be credited, which was a bit complicated because the system wasn't really built for that then, but it is getting there now. So it's interested for artists to see how we can use this kind of system for ourselves, to kind of empower ourselves. And those are pictures from my lab. Everything here is like all the computer screens, I picked them up from the trash room at the IT company I was friends with. Schools and chairs came from schools, chairs and tables came from schools that threw them away. Yeah, so it's we built this basically from nothing. And something we always did was to take technology out to the streets, to where people were. And there's a lot of, for example, refugees from Syria came into the lab, artists from other countries that couldn't really find community because it's hard to get friends in Sweden. I think Iceland is a bit similar. If you're new here, it's really hard to connect with people. So a space like this really gave people a network, even a family in some cases. So it was a very useful environment to solve social issues. And I also visited a lot of makerspaces around the world. So this is Stockholm, Warsaw, Helsinki, and Los Angeles. So there's just Beijing as well, and the Science Fest where we kind of brought technology out on the streets, all kind of like knitting and computers. And in the upper corners from my lab, where we had playtesting sessions. So when you design games, you often design prototypes first and you playtest them through the development, which is also a very interesting feature because during playtesting, you find issues really fast. So that's a method I use in other development as well. And we had this kind of similar events like here. So we always share our knowledge with people, everything from TEDx to smaller hacker events. And this was in the film studios where I had my lab. So we really invited people from all over the world to do things. This is also from the lab. We had game jam sessions. I invited all the companies in the area. So we had like Ericsson and Volvo and the Science Park and all those people. And everyone showed an interest in it, but didn't really dare to support it. The Science Park even actually wanted what we built. So in the end, as soon as I left, because it wasn't, I couldn't, at the end it was just not possible to pay the rent anymore, the Science Park actually took over the lab, which meant that everyone that was not a startup was not welcome anymore. So all the values we built kind of disappeared or turned into digital communities, which is so stupid for a city, but it depends a lot on the city. So that was a weird city to work in. Stockholm was totally different. In Stockholm, I got a space for free. Like we didn't even have to pay rent. So I've been fighting so long to pay the rent of my space. And in Stockholm, it was just like they barely knew me, but I got a space like in the center, right beside the. I worked at the DICE EA then, so it was just like across the street. And there was also a lot of different other game companies, so I could easily invite them to workshops around diversity. Which is a problem in the game industry, the lack of diversity. So it depends so much which environment you're in, what happens with those initiatives. And when we talk about equality, I really want to push on this equity, that we use the term equity instead, because this picture really illustrates, is that everyone doesn't have the same starting point. So it's not enough to talk about equality, we need to even think further. And this is also some things that I found important, like the more power you have, the more accountability you should have, and the more privilege, the more responsibility. That's how I usually try to think about things. This picture is just for fun, and I want to end with something more positive around technology and AI and human skills, because this is a very interesting picture. So what systems today, I mean, some people don't think AI is even the right terminology, but let's call it here because that's what everyone is used to saying it. So AI systems today can do the things that are blue, like the water is rising, and where the water will rise last, like the mountain tops, those are very human skills, right? art cinematography. It's really interesting to see art cinematography there on top because it says so much about our value system. So we should really reevaluate how we kind of the value we put on things, because I mean some art, of course, if you're Andy Warhol, is still like very economically fruitful, but most art, like if it's more experimental and so on, is not valued at all. It might be a bit better now with NFTs for a while, at least, when they figure out how to make it more environmental friendly, which is happening as well. But it's really interesting that we shouldn't like fear new technology, we should take control of it, which is what I feel with this stuff, because it's in my body. I have full control of my data with this chip. And of course this will be hacked in the future, like I expect it to be hacked, or people will build bigger sensors so they can read it from like a longer distance and so on. But then I will find something new. So privacy is really important also when we talk about metaverses, how we're going to think with identity. I thought of this as a way to kind of prove your identity when you log into a metaverse. It could be an option. Because we're going to have, there's going to be a balance between privacy, but also being able to be anonymous, to have a safe space. And those images are examples of that things are getting better. The game worlds that are designed today are more diverse. We're starting to see more characters. The 8-bit game on top is actually an older game, one of the first trans characters. Which is a fun picture, and we have a lot of young people doing so much for the world now. So, and also this Douglas OS is interesting. I don't know if it's released yet, but it's designed for more diversity. So I think it's designed by people with darker skin tone only, and they're also going to make hardware. So I'm looking forward to be able to switch to a new system soon. This is just a quote that I like, and this is some book and links that I think are interesting. So weapons of math destruction is really interesting in terms of biased AI system. Transcendence is an interesting way, or is an interesting summary of human development. And this quote I had about how the brain shrinks in monocultures, it's very thoroughly explained in this book. And how the religious system changed when people started owning land, and how gradually women lost their status in society thanks to like new religions and this kind of land ownership. So it's a very good summary if you just want like a quick summary of human history. Then LearnDoShare.net is a book series I co-created with a global network that has a lot of examples around storytelling, Creative Commons. It's available on LearnDoShare.net. It's now connected to Columbia University in New York. All the books are downloadable PDFs that are free. And all my projects are on Isdrake.com. Yeah, so that's my last slide, yeah. And it feels like I talked more than an hour. Yeah, maybe, no? Let's see. So questions, and feel free to come here and check stuff out if you want. Yeah.
The question itself. It's because you mentioned that technology is not new, and we don't have to fear it if it's made diverse.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree, but I'm also like there is a lot of people who is afraid of diversity itself. Like for me, the main point is behind the intention of the creation, no? Because then design and function.
Yeah.
And of course that diversity itself make systems less vulnerable, but it comes also to a point because too much diversity could go against, if it's not integrated diversity, could go to the struggle and competition for resources. Yeah, we know that who tends to have more power is easily taking it So for me, what is the intention behind that creation is really important, and also how we found out, how we economically make it there, because what I think is that the market studies itself, and the market is making us from to economics, not to benefit, but to benefit through what? What's the aim of the benefit? I think that progress is not anymore made for making healthier and better lives and create a earth that is sustainable, but creating also a lot of distraction, is hijacking our bodies. And I think that knowledge is perfect to understand each other and to communicate better. But I'm very critical also with all of this, because I think that it's like we, metaphorically, we want to see if we can live in another planet, but because we haven't learned to live in this one. So I would like to think that aiming the technology to understand ourselves, each other, and then to communicate better with diversity is how we can create integrated all of this. But diversity itself could be also lead to the sense of the threat, and then to itself.
I mean, it is an initial investment for when you talk about companies and profit, for example. That's what I really notice in the game industry when you start talking about diversity, is that people don't really dare to do it because they think about the stock market and the stock value. And the stock value is like the main value system in that world, at least. So what I experienced in the game industry was that people were not, they were afraid to take this initial investment because their stocks wouldn't like rise in the same. So that's why many companies do the same games like for 10 to 20 years, because it's a secure profit. But this is also changing now. So I think it was EA that said like pretty recently that if you don't like that we have a female game character in this war game, then don't play our games. Like that would not happen 5 years ago, or even when I was there, because the diversity workshops that I started there created some reactions. But then they actually have a really good diversity initiative now. So it took a couple of years, but it took some people standing up and like protesting, and then it happened. Actually taking action, because sometimes I just do, like I hacked the systems I was in. So I just set up a diversity group within the company without asking anyone. And people started coming, and then the company sees that, and it's like, what's happening now? What are they doing? And they get worried, and then they set their own initiative. Okay, so now we have to do an initiative, and then it happens. So there's a quote by Buckminster Fuller that I really like, and it's that sometimes, or you shouldn't fight the existing system. You should create a new system that makes the old system obsolete. So that's also what I thought with the lab, that let's just build a new system and then hope that the old one dies on the way. Because just fighting this fight all the time, it's usually just tires you out, and you don't have the power, and your voice won't be heard enough. So yeah, I hope that was an answer to what you said. Yeah, thanks.
What is this Douglas operating system?
So it's a new operating system. I haven't tried it yet, and I haven't seen what has happened. I checked the website a while ago, but there was really nothing new. But check out Douglas with 2 S's, and it's named after a freedom fighter in the US who basically made life better for people with darker skin in the US. So he's a freedom hero. That's why they named after him. And I think they're going to do servers and stuff also, like hardware, so you can have an entire system based on their tech. So yeah, I don't know what's going on right now with it. But I follow the website, so I hope to learn more soon. I put the link here in the back. Also, Algorithmic Justice League is also an important link. Oi. So the researcher with the white mask started Algorithmic Justice League. And they are doing a lot of important work. So Amazon actually tried to silence her when she noticed how biased their system was. And the American police force were about to buy a face recognition system from Amazon. I think this is how it was. And it was really biased towards darker skins and also Latino people. So actually giving them harder, more time in jail and so on. So this is what the biased AI system does. It's really unfair towards everyone that isn't a light-skinned male. So when she found this bias in the system, first nobody listened to her, but then people started seeing what was wrong. So like IBM, for example, they adapted, but Amazon didn't want to adapt at first. But then in the end, I think the police, they actually didn't buy the system in the end. So it's on hold or something right now. So her research actually probably saved a lot of people. So Algorithmic Justice League is also a very important site to check out. And this is Douglas IO. So I recommend to check out those two sites. Yeah, any other questions? No?
I was wondering, there's a lot of abuse or harassment of women on in online games, gaming. Are there any initiatives or something to try to?
Yeah, so there's, if you go into my lab site, collaborator.community, I've gathered links. So on this side you can both read about the model, like the playbook, how the space is designed, and then you have this diversity. And then I just gathered like for all kinds of accessibility, diversity, inclusion, equity. So it's a lot, it's very game oriented because it's my industry. But here there's a lot of resources, like Fair Play Alliance is doing a lot, Take This is also doing a lot. There is this online harassment hotline that women who were harassed themselves set up. So you probably know some of the Gamergate. A lot of women were harassed, and they set up new safe spaces. So there, and this is also where AI system can help with finding words. So if somebody writes like bitch or something like this, the systems can find it fast with tags. And help to administrate the forums, because it's really hard to administrate forums where people chat, all the time. So in esports, I don't know if you watch esports on Twitch, for example, there is usually a chat on the side, and administrators have to sit there in real time and erase stuff all the time. So you see things being erased like constantly, and that is a space where I think AI systems can help us administrate this. Through finding words and so on, and blocking some people. So, but this the harassment hotline is good because that's a place where it's very American oriented, but anyone can call or contact them if they're being harassed. IGDA, International Game Developers Association, also have like a resource link like this, where there are examples of what you can do, what you should do to protect your accounts and so on. So there's, as you can see, there's a lot of links here. So there's more and more women in games. It's a global organization as well. Female agents work with esports in Sweden mainly. So there are a lot of things happening, especially for me, at least the way I see it, that the game industry has reacted much better than in the film industry, for example. I find more resources in the game industry than when I worked with film, which also has this problem, but it was a bit more silenced because we didn't have like a Gamergate before Me Too came. So yeah, so check this site out. And I know people in a lot of those organizations if you need to be connected with someone, and so on. Yeah.
I was really curious about the sort of the female brain drain around 1985 that you talked about, when like computer science, I guess before then, was sort of dominated by women in telecom. Like you had the telephone operators. Is it pretty much just the video game advertisement campaign that you would point to as the culprit?
It's a lot. I would guess it's a lot of things combined. So it's the language in media. It's the newer religion and how they put another like made female the secondary gender, psychology like Freud and that era. So I would say it's a lot of things combined, but commercials made a huge difference. Because what we see in everyday media, like I don't know if you heard the Marvel example I mentioned, that's kids grow up with it, and that's gonna shape them for decades unless they learn more about diversity in themselves. Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's just that; it's a combination of many things. And also it depends on if you're in a war, if you live in an area of war or not. Because that's also one way where a lot of women worked with computers like the Enigma and this stuff, is because there were more males out in war. While if you go further back in history, like the Iron Age, the female warriors were almost the same number as the male warriors, at least here in the northern part, also north of Russia, I think. But my knowledge is mostly in the Nordic area, and the problem in archaeology was that before, male archaeologists, they just said that, okay, there's a sword in the grave, this is a man. That was like the level of science. Or there's pearls, this must be a female. But now actually when you have better technology that can check the bones, you see that many of those warrior graves were actually women. So the female warriors, in Israel, the women are trained Krav Maga and have the same military education, I think, as the men. So it depends on where you are in the world, I would say. But in the archaeological material, that I saw was that when Christianity came to Sweden, which was a really long process, and the female graves were like, you could see in the grave system that men were like closer to the center of the Christian church, and where the sun hits the ground, and the female were like pushed to the side. So it's very like obvious in the material what's happening. Yeah.
So you talked earlier about discrimination regarding robots.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that?
Yeah. So some people talk about robot racism, others are critical about this term. So discrimination against robots is very much like this, the treatment of this installation at Ars Electronica. And it's also like the things I said, like my chips are, or NFCs are connected, that some people say, yeah, it's the mark of the beast, for example. So that is a way of discriminating. And also the example with how I was treated by the medical industry and doctors, that on like with a magnet, when I couldn't do an MRI, the doctor was like really upset and angry at me because I had a magnet in my hand instead of actually learning about this machine, because I heard other cyborgs that could do MRIs because the doctor actually knew where in the machine the magnetic field was. So you could place the hand of the patient outside of the magnetic field, basically. So if this doctor would have actually known his machine, he might have placed my hand in a better area, so I would be able to do the scan. But they actually had to pull me out and pull the needles out and all this stuff, because it was ripping my finger apart, because it's a really strong magnet in the machine. So that is one way, one kind of discrimination. Then it's robot discrimination. It's really hard to define now, but I really connected a lot with animism that I said, to kind of treat like the companion robots. There's actually the one on top, Roomba, the cleaning robot. And then the little one on top is a space communication robot that is supposed to communicate with the people in space so they don't feel so lonely. Those are like the kind of more cute Japanese versions, but if you look at the military, they are more like the Terminator kind. In the US, I don't know if you've seen videos with those dog-like creatures, and you see people kicking them. So people think it's fun to kind of kick them and to see if they fall or not, because they are really well designed so they can climb on hills and so on. But there are videos with American kids who kind of kick the robot, and it can shape some systems. Like, did you hear about the Twitter bot that turned into a sexist Nazi like within hours because it was basically feeding from the human feeds? So this is what can happen if humans like treat those systems in a bad way. It can in some not Terminator kind of style, but on more subtle biased ways get back to us.
Should they have like same rights as humans?
This is interesting in terms of the art and the NFTs and the paintings, because that's something I'm not sure how to deal with. So this audio piece that I mentioned with the growl, so if I record voices from people that I think have a cool voice, I can just take their voice and put it in my body. It has to be done with consent, right? But what happens with the data bots, where there is a neural network trained on like thousands of voices, who owns this music? And I don't know how to answer that. But if every piece of music was put on a blockchain, you could actually track it. So that is one way to kind of have the credit of the artist continue with the file wherever it goes, or a smart contract. So that is one way of like taking care of people's credits, but I'm not sure if it's enough. And with the same with the paintings, where there's a robot painting something based on a style from another painter, you have the same question. So I would say that the Databots is a group of scientists. So they have some responsibility in how they use it, and they also build the system, so it's their system, right? So there is a human behind the AI system. So they built something that they own, should have credits for. So what I would have done if I was them, I would have asked the band Meshuggah that they made a album and just asked them, can we share this? Can we make this and can we share it alike if there's profit? There's no profit in this case. And that's something that we did in our lab, for example, when we had hackathons or game jams. We just said that when we go into this room for this game jam, everything that happens here is Creative Commons. That was the easiest way for us to not have to deal with privacy, so that everyone knows that everything I say now, everything I build now, all the prototypes is Creative Commons, and we're going to publish it on this like global game jam site or something, where it's like share alike. Or any kind of Creative Commons that you choose. So that is, at the moment, the easiest solution, I think, to just have it Creative Commons. Or write a smart contract with an artist that you borrow material from. So and still, today there's always a human behind whatever system is being built. So far, this will probably change, but yeah, it's very complicated. But it's the same, like in more analog art as well. Like when you use music for a dance piece, I'm always thinking about those questions. Yeah. Is it enough answer? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just like as a musician and an avid sugar fan, probably oftentimes used the material in my own work without credit.
Yeah.
And it sort of seems to me that these systems are kind of doing the same thing. So I just find it that there might be some cause for concern in terms of discrimination, where a system inside of a computer has to acknowledge everything, while me as a human
with music it's really hard because we hear music all the time, so it's almost impossible to find something completely like maybe you do put it in your body like cyborg stuff. This is kind of new, but the audio files could be inspired by something. So it's complicated, and I'm not sure how I'm going to solve it with the voice that I want to do. Because when I try to find examples, because I don't sing myself and I need artificial screams, I started recording machines. For example, I was in a boat, the machine room of a boat, and recorded different motors. Tried to create a voice that way. So I use machines to make a machine voice instead of. But it's a longer process, and I found it really hard to turn it into proper voices. Like there's a lot of voice generators and text-to-speech generators, but they're all so boring. Like everyone sounds like Siri or the male version. There's actually a gender-neutral voice called X. So there's a couple of researchers that created a gender-neutral voice. Or no, Q. It's called Q. Q. So I'm looking forward to more voices like this. That you can tweak even more. And they're not only like human, because growl is one of the hardest like singing techniques to do. So I found it hard to create it from a motor sound. But we'll see how that's going to be solved. Yeah.
Comment that it's interesting how like there's AI algorithms on platforms like YouTube that are in a way protecting copyright but suppressing creativity because they analyze like music material instantly. But they're very harsh, and sometimes even material that's in the creative, it's already out of copyright. Like it's older, than it still gets caught.
Yeah.
Even if you do a cover, because it thinks you're doing a cover of someone else who's recorded it and has a copy. It's difficult to get around it. It's only promoting bigger companies and artists.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I don't know how to, there are discussions online and nobody knows how to deal with it.
Maybe someone has to code that if this piece is older than 70 years, it's.
Well, it's just that YouTube doesn't have to. They don't have to figure out the actual copyright. They just have to protect their clients.
Yeah.
So it's safer for them to just. They don't have to deal with it. They just have an AI system shut it down.
So when it becomes like that, for example, what I did is that I minimized my use of Google. So I use Brave, for example, and DuckDuckGo instead as a search engine. So the most powerful way for communities to affect the big companies is to stop using their products. Sometimes that's the only way, because then you hit them where it hurts. Like the only thing you can hit is the money flow, right? With the data sheets, for example, what if we all decided to upload pictures of blue hands? Would it change the Google search, for example? I mean, if everyone did that, it would change the availability of pictures online. So that's up to people to just try to swap. And it is, I mean, some like when Facebook became popular, there was this other option. Was it DS4 or something? I don't remember the name. But there was another platform, and I really tried to like get into it, but it was not designed. So if it's not designed just like code, and if you're not a programmer, you're just not going to leave Facebook for that platform. That's not going to happen. It has to be, and this is where this A in STEAM is important as well, that we really need to collaborate more, designer, artists, programmers, because it's usually not a good product if it's only one skill set. So that's why collaboration that I talked about, which is one of the core skills of the future, is that we really need to collaborate better and find ways to communicate better between the different work skills, and really value. Because what I felt in the game industry is that the programmers were always like the kings. and then you had the artists somewhere, and the designers like somewhere, and then everyone else didn't really count. So and that was like, okay, but we're training like in a job I had, we were training AI agents in war games, and it was like, yeah, maybe we should train them on LARPs or something instead. Like, is it really? It felt like people really didn't think things through always. So if we would have had designers question some of the things instead of just going ahead and like running towards the next trend, we could have maybe designed a smarter system. Yeah, I don't know. We need more diversity, because if it's only like most of Silicon Valley, for example. I mean, I don't want to point out individuals, but what I found with the tech industry in Silicon Valley is that a lot of the people doing the software we use were very young. I mean, there were people without life experience. So a lot of people that moved straight from their parents' house into a big company, and then they stayed in this big company with a high salary for maybe 10 or 15 years. They live in a bubble. It's really hard. It was really hard for me to communicate with someone that's been in this like privileged bubble their entire life, and that hasn't starved, that hasn't like had to take care of themselves, and hasn't really seen a lot of the issues in the planet. And they have so much power in a lot of those big tech companies. That it's almost impossible to talk about diversity with a person that doesn't have a life experience outside of this bubble. So something really needs to have. It really needs to shake things up. And slowly, there are more and more non-males in the game industry now. And then I've seen some of the people, sometimes called veterans, kind of leave the companies because they lose a bit of their privilege, and then they like it, then they start a startup instead. And then suddenly they have to actually run a company and fix their salary. So then it becomes harder. Another issue then is that they now all people like angel investors really want to invest in games, so they just throw millions on people that's been in the same company for 15 years because it's a safe bet, because they've done a certain kind of game for 15 years, so they know they can deliver on that. What they don't know is that maybe they can't deliver on actually running a company, because a lot of the people I meet in management have no idea how to run a team, how to count a budget, how to even talk with a team. So it's interesting to see what happens now, because there is some kind of generational change happening now in those industries, in films and games. But it's a balance, because you also don't want to like give someone shit for their experience, because 10 years experience is something is of course good as well. But it's better if you can actually try different things in life. Like I've done so many different works because I took care of myself since I was a kid. So I've been working as a security guard. I have been cleaning sweat from people in those tanning beds. When I went to high school, I was running this tanning salon that was popular in the 90s. And all kinds of different kinds of work, just to like put food on the table. When I built my lab, I mean, I had a lot of meetings with politicians. I was a booked speaker all over the world. But what I mostly did was actually paint and renovate the lab, because I did that during the night, and then I had the meetings during the day. So DIY, I think, is good for all people, to just have to learn how to do stuff yourself and take care of yourself. Then I think you're also a better work colleague. Like I learned so much from the people in my lab, like all the people that came to my lab. It really made me, it increased my empathy. Because I was kind of hard as a teenager, judging people faster if I thought they were weak, and so on. But I learned so much from refugees mainly in the lab, and also kids, and actually started realizing this thing I said with equity, that equity is really about where you come from, where you grew up, what your parents were like. So I mean, having a Swedish passport is a huge privilege for me. Then I never had support from parents and stuff. So I had to take care of myself as well, which I think made me a better colleague. yeah, so it's so much about background. But empathy, I think, is I learned empathy through the people in my lab, basically. I didn't have that before. So it's really this life experience that you don't have if you're in the safe bubble for 15 years and you don't have to cook for yourself and you can have 10 cars and this kind of stuff. It's really, I found it very complicated but interesting to communicate with people in this world, like in Silicon Valley. That's why I found I couldn't stay in this world because it was really draining my creativity. But I'll probably work in the game industry soon again. I'm going to do some research now, but I'm actually planning on working with the bigger companies soon to kind of fund my research as well. So at some point I did apply for a work at CCP here a couple of years ago, I think. But usually you don't get called to an interview if you haven't been if you haven't shipped 3 games. That's a very common thing. Yeah. Which technically I could say that I have, because the R&D department I worked at EA, they did stuff for all their games. So, but I don't think R&D are credited on the games. I haven't even checked because I just think it's silly. I think you should look at a person's track record, not the number of cred titles on something. So yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah.
I was, sorry, different topic. I was wondering what you think about the idea of that we're actually already all cyborgs because we have the smartphone.
Yeah.
And most people really, it's not inside the body, but most people aren't far from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Elon Musk is one of the most famous people with this opinion, and I think in a way it's true. For me, I really don't care about categories. I can identify with the term cyborg for now. Technically or scientifically, the way I treat it in my research is that a cyborg implant is under the skin, which can be medical or general. So that's my standing point now. For the science I do. But in general, in society, I could agree that the smartphone is always close to our body, so it is an extension of our body in a way. I don't have anything against that opinion.
Because I was thinking about the rights of a cyborg in this sense, and if you think of us with smartphones as cyborgs, then we actually have a privilege above people who don't have that connectivity and that information at hand all the time.
Yeah, you have access to more knowledge. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Because I was thinking about people who might be jealous of a cyborg who has maybe increased ability in some way.
Yeah, but that you can say the same about the car or expensive jacket. So that's always going to exist. So that's another thing that I thought about was in sports. Is it called doping in English? Like when you take substances, how do you like draw the line then? Because a lot of people take some like biohacking with different not illegal substances, but they are changing what they eat, like specific diets. I thought about my running shoes. Like when I run in my jumping shoes, I'm much faster than other people, so I would probably not be allowed to run in a marathon, for example. But on the other hand, it's much heavier for me to run, so I don't last that long. So in a way, I think it evens out. But how do you measure it, right? So it's complicated. That's why I don't like categories. And I don't compete with others. I only run for myself. So in my case, it's all. But I totally understand that there are people. I mean, this stuff isn't free. It costs a bit to do this stuff. So of course, not everyone has the access to the same implants. I mean, if when I had issues with a tumor in my leg, I thought like if I would have to lose this, I wouldn't afford like this fancy robot leg. Like Swedish medicine or the hospital wouldn't give me this robot leg. Like how would I access it? Then I would have like 3D printed it or something. It would be all shitty and fall apart. So that's of course that's privilege. If you can afford, if you're in Silicon Valley, you can order this kind of cool leg, so I could dance and do whatever. So it's and vaccine. Who has access to vaccine? like malaria vaccines and stuff. So that's nothing. That's everything in society. It's not just cyborg stuff. So that's also consciousness in people developing this. So the blue chips that I have, the new ones, this company is really trying to make the cost really low, because their core goal is to have medical implants, so that people all over the world can have them for medical reasons. So if you have a CEO that is conscious about this stuff and accessibility, then it's better. But if you have a CEO that just wants to gather more cars for their garage and look at the stock market, then you won't have the same accessibility. Yeah. I don't think we're going to have to use... words like digital are disappearing. Online, offline, it's like words that I don't really use anymore. Or the weirdest one is IRL, like in real life for me, so that people still use it is really funny. Like off screen, I used for a while, but now we're also having different kinds of screens soon. So yeah.
I was wondering about this point about the rights of the robots.
Yeah.
So you had this example of the sex robot, I guess, who was like parts of the robot was broken.
Yeah.
But you were saying this was an example of cyborg abuse. I'm wondering if that's really like I'm not sure I would see it that way, because it seems more like it was an attack of the image of the woman. The same thing with a puppy. I'm not sure it would really be so common if it was a male robot.
Yeah, I don't know.
Same thing applies, because I was thinking about this aspect of violence. Like, how do you draw a line then in terms of virtual reality?
Yep.
Violence and not violence. So in this aspect, like, if what happens in virtual reality is to a degree reality, if you would count all the violence happening in computer games, whether it would come out, how that would come out, maybe there is more violence. It's just virtual. Does it really make a difference?
Yeah, there was a case in VR, in one of the new VR platforms, where somebody was stabbed. I don't remember the entire story. But then people started making this bubble, so you could have like a bubble around you in VR, so you can close out people.
But I'm meaning more like the symbology of the act.
Yeah.
Like you shoot someone, no one dies.
Mm.
But like the same thing with a robot, I wouldn't say like it was an attack on a robot person, it was an attack on an image of a person, like the image of a woman. I think there's a sadism that comes up somehow, obviously, in today's climate.
But then that represents society as a whole, and it doesn't really matter if you're in a metaverse or on the street.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm wondering this aspect of violence and not violence. If it's virtual violence, is it not still violence?
Yeah.
It's symbolic.
Yeah, I mean, violence is part of the life we live. I mean, war is a thing happening all around us. I mean, here in the north we're safer, but that could also change. But what I'm saying is that games do not affect how people act in that sense. That's like how your parents are bringing you up.
Yeah, I know. I just find it interesting to complicate it a bit.
Yeah.
In terms of like, yes, it's true. Like well, I don't know if there's any conclusive evidence whether it does or doesn't like affect anyone's behavior. But
With the sex robot.
But there's just this fundamental question of
Yeah.
like all these people privately doing violent acts in computer games. Is this still not a form of violence, even if it is symbolic? Like whether the level of violence has stayed the same? Is there something about the human condition?
It can be in some cases. So when you have cases of like Gamergate, some people that have problematic behavior, like people who are addicted, if they are addicted to drugs or whatever, it's the same kind of behavior, and that can happen with games as well. So addiction is a problem you have to treat in another way. It isn't the fault of the game. It's something wrong. The person has a problem they have to deal with anyway. and in some cases games were their way of channeling it out, but it could also be drugs or something else.
No, but it's more fundamental. It's just people like shooting people in games, no?
It depends. For me, when I get into a game flow in a game like God of War, the new one was one of my favorite games, where I fight with an axe or a double sword, and there is such a great flow in the movement in the game for me, that I play it to relax. Like I don't really have to think. I just slash monsters, and for me that is a way to relax. I've in my mind there is no connection to like violence or my behavior in other settings. Like I said with the sex robot, for me physically I would never be able to approach, even if the robot was designed differently, I would never be able to like go there and break it, because that for me would be impossible.
But what if the robot was a virtual robot and you could?
A virtual.
Yes, because you're talking about physicality of
Yeah.
the android, whereas I think
Yeah.
realistically, if you're talking about the robot, it would be a virtual intelligence.
Yeah.
Not necessarily
I was in.
but
I understand.
It wouldn't necessarily be in the body.
I was put in a situation. I play tested a game in the US that's called Robo Recall, and there was actually really cute robots approaching me, and I was supposed to rip off their arm and like build weapons with it, and that was like really hard. So I tried to play this game. It felt weird to do it, but when I got into it, you kind of start playing it. So that's it is complicated. I understand what you mean, but for me, it's like my behavior. I don't really connect it with the way I treat others, even if there was a game where I ripped the arm of a robot. For me, I did feel a bit unease doing it in that game, but I don't have any problem slashing monsters with an axe. So it is complicated. And I mean, I can try to analyze each example of the things I'm doing, which is interesting in a way. So it's an interesting question.
Doesn't it also matter with like, sorry, too far to,
No.
with like, who is also sharing this experience of you slashing monsters? Like you wouldn't play that monster game if you were playing it in the same room as someone else, maybe very sensitive to that kind of thing.
No, I play
Or
for
you wouldn't
myself.
be a teddy bear in front of a kid.
No, my brother's babies, like I wouldn't play this in front of them, but when they grow up, I could play it with them. So it depends on because I know that their parents are treating them in the right way and talking about stuff in the right way.
It was kind of in this line, like, because you, correct me if I'm wrong, did you say that playing, it doesn't affect the behavior, gaming?
Yeah.
I'm completely in this, like, disagreeing.
Okay.
Because I think that we are, the way how we decide the actions that we take are coming from the stories that we are relating everyday life. Like the representation that we have around is what it guides us or help us to decide what do we do. And then I think that it's always about proportions and the consciousness that we already have, and for example how old we are and what we've experienced before. But of course, I think if we live a life pretty much online and few offline with experiences, touching, smelling, or like relating with physical stories, we can be kind of hooked. And what I meant with like the first thing it came to my mind, it was that you're slashing monsters, but there is games that are slashing people, and the amount of time that you can be diving in that is gonna reinforce how you can feel and relate with the reality. So if you're maybe an adult and has a diverse life and with proportions of different kind of contact and communication, it's fine. But if your child, you're developing your own consciousness about what is reality and how you relate with reality, it could be really dangerous, no?
But that's what I mean, that it's the parents' responsibility. It's not the game itself, it's the way, it's the setting of the child playing.
Yeah, for me it's a lot of scales of responsibilities here through laws and market and our own process as our creators and the intention and all of that. Like I don't think that it's only parents, it's an exposition of culture that we are creating and recreating all the time. And yeah, gaming affects us our behavior, but of course it depends on how we
The setting affects your behavior. Scientifically, games are not connected to violence in that sense.
I mean, what I'm saying is that it helps you to normalize things. Is depending of how, is also what you said about the net, this net that you, depending of, it knows how you focus, so it makes you go farther or not. And I think that games are designed also kind of with that, to help you to go farther or not. And what I said is the amount of exposition that you can have to something, so you normalize that, and that can help you to adopt some kind of behaviors like that. If it's like, algorithm and the representation of the hands, you think that is more normal, so that reinforces your idea of, a hand, white hand. No?
No, but that's why I work with diversity, to diversify those kind of settings. You raised your hand before.
I was thinking same line as her, because you talked about with the Christian values in the Marvel movies. Is it then like, is it the parents' job to take the child away and not expose them to that?
No, it's the parents' job to show different stories. It's not to create the we and them, because there's also research showing that people, the kids that come from the new religious homes are more, they have lower empathy for other kids, because you create this we and them, and the people who are not in our group are less of less value. They're not as important as I am. So the parent has to like show different religions, and that is exactly why I early in my presentation showed this picture. That why is media everywhere, like Marvel, one of the biggest story universes, promoting or saying that their American Christian belief is the right way, which is what the character is actually saying. There is only one God, right? But that's false. So in that case, I would say it's the writer at Marvel should think about it, but not always. They don't always do it. So in the end, it's still the parents that has to say no, because check those pictures. This is how many spirits you can find all around the world. So if I was writing for Marvel, I would have not used this line. But it still falls back to the parent or the setting of whoever is around. I mean, it's not just children, it's grown-up. It's actually more often grown-ups that have to be taught this stuff. That this is the diversity of our planet. So we have to change this colonial truth and see that, yeah, sure, you can have the person or the creature you believe in, but everyone else also has to have the right to believe in all of those spirits. That's my short answer.
Should we let that be the last word, because we're kind of running out of time?
Yeah.
I think because we have also a next program coming on at 5, so but yeah, was it a really important one? No, I was just comment on the violence in games thing.
Yeah.
I've been playing games since I was a kid, and also watching action movies, and I don't think it has any effect in terms of making me more violent. But what I do appreciate in some recent games that I feel is a change is the way they treat the other in these games. The one you mindlessly are supposed to murder. Because usually when it's humans, and you also have movies like, I think it was the John Wick movies, where he just mows down hundreds of people. And you're not supposed to think about them. You're supposed to just be satisfied about him getting revenge. But like, I really appreciate, I feel a small change happening, because there are games like in The Last of Us 2, where when you kill somebody, and then their friends call out their name. And I love that, because it actually humanizes them. And I do think that has some effect of how you perceive the other, like the henchman, or the terrorist, or the Russian guy, or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm Russian, I grew up with 80s movies where we were always the bad guys.
Yeah, and there are those stereotypes which Marvel like reinforces.
It
So-
bothers me a little when people are killed without any consequence. Like, I grew up playing Doom, I don't mind, killing stuff in games. I think that is important.
It is getting better. And if you watch Chinese movies, it's like the Russians and the Chinese against the Americans.
Yeah.
So it's very different where in the world you are.
Yeah.
Which is again why we need stories from all this, like why we need more people in the game industry, in the film industry, to change those narratives that are very, very biased at the moment. Yeah, thank you so much for listening all this time.